So I think slowly there will be a major part of the supply chain move to Vietnam. So a few years ago, it only stopped at the last phase of assembly. But more and more, you will get questions like, how show me the entire supply chains. And they to avoid all those risks, more and more the Chinese and other like manufacturers just move the entire supply chain to Vietnam.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave. Hey, Valerie, really excited to have you back on the show. It's been a bit of a holiday, and people have been asking, where is Valerie? Because we don't understand how Vietnam is adjusting to this new world with Trump. So, welcome back.
Hi, Jeremy. Great to be back. Excited to share about Vietnam in this episode.
So, Valerie, the world has changed a lot. I think it's been about several months of break, and during that time frame, Trump got elected, and then he took office, and then it's effectively been about 2 months since he's been in power. So obviously, lots of tariffs have been imposed on Canada, Mexico, as well as China. So, kind of curious, Valerie, like, what's your quick summary of the situation from a Vietnamese perspective?
Yeah, actually, Vietnam is also going through a lot of changes within the internal government. Like we're also like going through a huge internal government reform. So why Trump being elected is very significant. I feel like the Vietnamese government is already prepared for that coming. So they already have like tactics, some measurements, these new administrations, and doesn't matter whether it's like Democrats or Republicans. I think we have really diplomatic policy to work with either of the administration. Yeah, especially with Trump. Know that we are one of the country that has the highest trade surplus with US. And Trump is very like unpredictable. One day he can say like you're his friend, and next day he can be like, you have 100 billion trade surplus. We need to increase the tariff to you. I think the Vietnamese government I already expect and predict this uncertainty. So they like internally, they are doing a lot of reform in order to prepare for this 4 years of uncertainty as well. Yeah, but even Trump, he's very opportunistic. Before getting elected, he signed a huge deal, huge real estate deal to invest in Vietnam. So he knows Vietnam will benefit from the trade war, term or short term. So his family organization already took advantage of that.
What are they building in Vietnam?
Yeah, so the Trump Family Foundation in October last year signed a 1.5 billion deals to build a new luxury golf resort in Hưng Yên. It's a northern province of Vietnam, 1 hour away from Hanoi. Also, that's also where the hometown of the current General Secretary Party Chief Tolam. He's from that province. He's from Hưng Yên. Yeah, they signed the MOU to build this new luxury Trump golf resort. Of course, joint venture with a local real estate group called Kinh Bắc Industrial Group. Yeah, so they have some planning there and some like ambitious, I guess, goal, and they see the potential in Vietnam, and that's why they signed this deal before Trump get elected. So it's very opportunistic.
So it's interesting because the Prime Minister of Vietnam said that he's happy to golf with Trump all day long.
Yeah. So the full context is the Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính say that he's happy to golf with Trump all day long if that's what it takes to get investment, more investment from the US to Vietnam. So Phạm Minh Chính, the Prime Minister, their main job is to regulate and help economy, govern, control the economy and make sure the economy is growing. So he has a really capitalist mindset, and he wants to get more money, more FDI investment to Vietnam. So that's why he shared that.
I mean, I think it's interesting because right now the Chinese companies are doing almost 1 in 3 new investments in Vietnam, right? Because of this, kind of like trade tension and war that's already happening. I think the statistic is that you mentioned the trade surplus, And Vietnam is one of the largest trade surpluses, right, of $124 billion last year,
Yeah.
which is the
Yeah.
third largest after China and Mexico. So both China and Mexico have already received, tariffs.
Yeah.
And so Vietnam is the third largest trade surplus, seems to be next on the list.
Yeah. We definitely in the watch list because 100+ billion is huge, right? So we expect to prepare for mentally for some tariff, but I don't think he will punish Vietnam to the level of China. So China, he might give tariff of like 20% or more, but I think maximum tariff for Vietnam is under 10%. So net is still the winners in this trade war.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting piece, right? Because that's linked, right? The trade surplus, the risk of trade war, the China tariff, and the Chinese investment inflow is linked, right? Because basically it sounds like everybody's making a bet that yes, Vietnam can get more trade tariff increases from the US, but it's always going to be lower than China. So there
Always.
is a tariff arbitrage. If a Chinese
Yeah.
company was to move from China to Vietnam, the factories, the manufacturing, it's close by. It's linked to the Chinese manufacturing hubs through the, kind of like the rail and the road networks and the sea networks. So it's an interesting push factor for Chinese companies to move to Vietnam.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I think we mentioned a few episodes ago, we just signed the approval for high speed like bullet train project from north to south. So first time ever we have a bullet train projects, and actually the Chinese government want to build and develop these bullet train projects. So there are a lot of infrastructure projects are being and approved in the next 10 years for Vietnam. That's the goal of the new government, the new party, the new general secretary really want to focus on building the infrastructure for the country. And yeah, the Chinese government got a piece of that.
I mean, it's interesting because, China, the incentive is clear, right? Because it's manufactured in China, the certificate of origin is China versus if they move, the factory or the final assembly to Vietnam, then it becomes Vietnam, right? I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you think is the mix between it being like a very like small step versus actually a very high level of value addition in that goods?
Yeah. Okay. So I think slowly there will be a major part of the supply chain move to Vietnam. So a few years ago, it only stopped at the last phase of assembly, but more and more you will get questioned like how show me the entire supply chains, and they to avoid all those risks, more and more the Chinese and other like manufacturers just move the entire supply chain to Vietnam. So one example is like furniture. I think the entire furniture, like majority of the furniture you buy in the US are actually made in Vietnam 100%, not just the assembly anymore. You're seeing that with the airport for Apple. I think slowly you will see more of those products. Like, so it's, yeah, of course we started out with last phase of the assembling line. More and more Vietnamese got to move up to owning the entire supply chain. And that's also the wish and ambition of the new administration and the new government as well. And yeah, they're doing a lot of like reform to make sure the government is efficient and is like tech driven, because their ambition is to make Vietnam to become a high income country by 2045. So we are not happy with, we are just escaping the low income. We have to escape the middle income trap. Yeah. So more and more government will make sure they move entire supply chain to Vietnam.
Yeah, right now, Vietnam is China's third largest export destination. So China used to be going to, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea. So these were like the top, export destinations. But yeah, it's really interesting to see Vietnam is now the third largest export destination. Obviously, it's a function of both raw materials as well as intermediate goods, right? So I think it's interesting to see that shift happen. I'm just
Yeah.
curious that, you know, these are primarily driven by push factors. Are there any pull factors that the Vietnamese government is offering to Chinese investors or manufacturers to make it easier, better for them to move more of their supply chain?
Not just Chinese manufacturing. So we're giving the pull factor for everyone who wants to invest, who wants to keep job in Vietnam. So we give like tax incentives. Yeah, we're doing everything to pulling the foreign direct investment to Vietnam. not just the Chinese.
I think let's talk about all the people, right? So I think China and Hong Kong were about 1,300 new investment projects in Vietnam last year. Singapore is about 500. South Korea is about 400. Japan is about 300. Taiwan is about 200. And USA is about 100 investment projects. So I think China, Hong Kong together, 1,300 is roughly comparable to the next five put together, right? Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, USA. So you're saying, is the government trying to rebalance away from China and encourage more Singapore, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, USA investments? Or is there like any differential treatment?
I don't think there is any differential treatment. It just happened that like China is a neighbor. Yeah, it's closer than Singapore, closer than than Korea or Japan. So it's easier for them to shift to like down south, which is probably like only 1 or 2 hours away. So I don't think there's any differential treatment as of now.
Is there a nature or difference in the type of investments or manufacturing that these different countries bring? Because, do the Japanese, Singaporean, South Korea, Taiwanese, American other investments, like, is it for different flavor than the Chinese and Hong Kong manufacturers and investors?
I think the Japanese manufacturing tend to be more electronics and like chip in that sectors. The Chinese manufacturing are more like diverse. It can be like furniture, as I mentioned, even like food and beverage, cosmetic. A lot of Chinese cosmetic and beauty products are actually like now shifted to Vietnam. Yeah, so I think the Chinese type of profile is more diverse. The Korean and Japanese are more like electronics, chip design, etc. And that's also the agenda of the party chief told them he really want to encourage more like hardware, more hard tech investment into Vietnam.
So, I'm curious because, there was also a mention that Vietnam is going to buy, 100 planes from America. Just kind of curious, like, is that a way to like manage the trade tension or what's the push behind that?
Yeah, that's a part of our bamboo policy. We are firm, but we are flexible. We are friends with Russia, we are friends with China, and we are also friends with the US. So when Biden visited Vietnam last year, I think was back in September, we agreed to purchase plan from Boeing and be good friends with the US. And yeah, that's just a part of our bamboo policy.
Oh, that's interesting because, you know, I think when I read the news, it's being relabeled as a Trump kind of deal, for buying the planes. But I guess what's fair is that if it was done during the Joe Biden's visit to Hanoi, then it's kind of like a
Yeah.
continuation or expansion of the deal. So I guess
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, a Boeing plane is a multi-year contract, so it's a long
Yeah.
process to even get the jets delivered.
Yeah. To be fair, it started under Biden. But Trump also, he was really smart. Like he invited all the major conglomerates, CEO from Vietnam, and fly them to his golf resort. And but he was like doing business deal with them why they play golf. Yeah. So he definitely wants to get that narrative going.
Now I'm wondering how to improve my golf game. I guess. How's your golf game, Valerie?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay.
All right,
Now,
next time in
once
Singapore, I'll take you out, and then we'll
there was
see.
the lady who owned the largest budget airline in Vietnam. She didn't know how to play golf, so she was there, and then Trump was like teaching her how to play golf. But I don't think,
Oh, that is the best. That is the best
yeah,
move. It's like
yeah,
the classic, like you go on a date, I don't know how to bowl. Can you teach me how to bowl?
yeah,
So I think what's interesting, obviously, is that it sounds like Vietnam obviously will try to attract more investments from America. Obviously, I think it's one way to rebalance or at least balance out the side. Then I guess buy planes. Is there any other goods that Vietnam could buy from America? Maybe like military, you may hit. I don't know. But I think historically you said that military was bought from Russia, right? So I'm just kind of curious.
yeah, yeah. So military, we traditionally bought from Russia, but a lot of high techs and products. For example, you saw the Starlink deal. They want to invest more than $1 billion into Vietnam. Yeah, those are the services and products we buy directly from the US and from American companies, and not from US, not from China or Russia. I would say education. Right now, for like the biggest dream of most Vietnamese students is still to study abroad in the US, not China or Russia. I would say social capital, education wise, US is still like pull more weight.
Makes sense for them to do a deal with Starlink, obviously, because Elon Musk does a lot of manufacturing in general. He's in a good position in the White House, and I think Starlink will obviously make it much easier to digitize the whole Vietnamese economy, right? Because now you have internet everywhere. You don't have to lay broadband and fiber. So I think it's a win-win for everybody there. It is it's interesting because China is very anti Starlink because they have the Great Chinese Firewall, right, around the censorship or the control of what is allowed into China. Is
Mhm.
there a similar dynamic for the Vietnamese internet ecosystem? Because I've been there and I've been able to use my Instagram to take photos on my trips, but I'm just kind of curious from your perspective.
Yeah, we have some firewall and some protection, but not to the extent of Chinese government. But you coming here, you can still use Facebook, Google, Instagram, WhatsApp, just like you in the US. But if you try to enter some website like BBC or some website that is very anti current administration, like current Communist Party, it will totally be banned. You cannot access website like BBC or some hostile forum that are anti-government.
And I'm kind of curious because you mentioned that at the start of this conversation that Tolam has been pushing a lot of internal change as well, on top of this, kind of like response to a change to the US. So what have been the internal changes for Vietnam from your perspective?
Yeah. So technically, we are going through our own Doge reform. I'm not sure if we have to explain the Doge reform, but we are cutting about 20% of the public workforce sector. Yeah, we are merging so many ministry together, merging the provinces. So reduce the amount of provinces that Vietnam has. The government even abolish district level police. So if the police level is used to be like city level, district level, and then communal ward level. Now they just cut the middle layer. So it's honestly a bit chaotic right now. A lot of government officers don't even know if they have the job the next day. Some people have a bit like negative sentiment this day because they don't know if they have the next paycheck. The intention is for the greater good, for reducing budget, cutting the fat, cutting the corruptions, becoming more efficiency so that we have enough budget pay for our infrastructure project, which I mentioned, like we have a bullet train, we have done like 4 more metro line in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. That's very expensive. We have to stop workforce. So we are going through our own like Doge reform or like layoff movement.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's the most significant change since 1986 for Vietnam government. And yeah, Tolam, Party Chief Tolam is the main orchestrator of this project, this ambitious project.
What's the link with the prior Blazing Furnace anti-corruption campaign? Because I know that was in full swing during the last administration, but I'm just kind of curious, like, is it still going on or has it transitioned to this, government efficiency drive?
Yeah, I think this is a phase two of the anti-corruption campaign. Phase one, they arrested all the party that caused the corruption and the bureaucratic in the government. They clean out, and this is phase two. We have to reform to become a greater good, make sure budget is on track to pay for our infrastructure. If you are aware, our debt to GDP is among the lowest in Southeast Asia region. So we don't want to keep borrowing like more money pay for these infrastructure projects. We want to remain as one of the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the region.
I guess one way to think about it, of course, is that you have less layers, then things move a bit faster. You have less people, then you have less, kind of like dynamics around, more streamlined, more efficient. And then obviously the anti-corruption piece. Do you feel like it has any like impact on the daily life of Vietnamese citizens? Like, I don't know, is it like harder to get a driver's license? I'm just kind of curious right now.
I think daily life of a citizen who like just go work for a corporate, not much change. But for a business owner, there's a lot of changing because now if you want to get approval or license from the government for new projects, like for a construction project, for example, you don't know when that will be approved because the person, let's say before the district police division used to be in charge of that approval. Now he's gone. So where do you go to? Do you go to the city level or do you go to the communal level? It's very uncertain. It is more it affects more to business owners, especially like small business owners.
So I think what's interesting is that, obviously the economy of Vietnam is like in two sections, right? One is obviously the export oriented, the large companies, obviously they're working with the US, they're working with Chinese capital. For small, medium enterprises, how are they feeling, right? Because we talked about it before, is that a lot of the small producers are struggling because they're competing against Chinese imports and Chinese competitors, right? So I think I just recently read like, Chagi, which is the Chinese bubble tea, milk tea brand is moving into Vietnam, which is, I think, obviously good for people who like sugar and milk and everything.
Yeah.
But obviously, I can imagine there's like competition against your local F&B, restaurants and so on and so forth. So I'm just kind of curious, how are they doing in this new macro environment?
Yeah, it's a challenging time. Even the largest F&B group in Vietnam did not really expand aggressively last year. So they're focusing on make sure managing the current store per store level. F&B, yeah, especially the local F&B are going through a challenging time. It hasn't recovered to the, I guess, pre-anti-corruption campaign, pre-real estate crisis campaign, real estate crisis. It hasn't recovered to that level. And yeah, it's not helpful that the Chinese, more and more Chinese F&B are entering Vietnam. Not just Changi, right? It's a lot of Chinese hot pot, like Hai Di Lao, and some chains similar to Hai Di Lao are like in Vietnam really fast.
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because, at one level, you can call this like this is a modernization, right, of the Vietnamese economy. So those that are less innovative, I'm just saying, will just have to level up the game, or otherwise they get eaten by franchises and so forth. I think the other argument, of course, is that from a domestic perspective, you should be supporting these local F&B and local small manufacturers. And I think Indonesia, in contrast, has been a little bit more focused on protecting local manufacturers, and small medium enterprises compared to Vietnam. So I'm just kind of curious, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a hard argument to debate because I want to encourage like competitions and fair competition, right? For example, if we talk about e-commerce, we allow a lot of foreign players to enter Shopee, like TikTok shop. At some point we allow Temu to enter, but they have to exit because they didn't fulfill enough paperwork to government. And that's why all those foreign e-commerce players took over Tiki, which is a local e-commerce traffic. And yeah, Tiki is no longer in the top chart of market share, e-commerce market share in Vietnam. So by encouraging foreign competitions, you make the market like more competitive. You make entrepreneur here in Vietnam have to stay on top of the trend and stay more resilient. But at the same time, you make the death of the local guy much faster.
Yeah, I don't think it's an easy answer. And I think it's interesting because Southeast Asia, as a region, is also not very protectionist against Chinese exports compared to obviously EU and definitely, of course, versus America. So even though I think Indonesia is more protectionist than Vietnam, and Vietnam is probably a bit less protectionist, well, it's about equal to Singapore, I would say. So, but it's just that as a region, we're still, net relative to other regions, not putting up that many trade barriers with China. So I don't think there's an easy answer here. Of course, I think there are different segments in the market that benefit or lose, right? I think tourism, for example, I know is getting better in Singapore and Vietnam as well. I think I just saw a report that Vietnam travel market is expected to grow at 15% year on year. So it will
Yeah.
grow from, $18 billion last year to a projected $42 billion in 2030. So that's actually a huge increase. There's like effectively a doubling of the tourism industry over the next 5 years. And a lot of it's driven by domestic travel as well as, Chinese travel as well.
Yeah, I think in hospitality in Vietnam have still huge potential. And like now, most people only know about the tier one cities like Hanoi, Da Nang, big city. They don't really know of the tier two city, which are as beautiful but so much more affordable. The nearest town in Ho Chi Minh City is Mui Né. It's about an hour drive from Ho Chi Minh City. It's being like developed yearly there. Most of them are still boutique resort project. I guess less than 100 room each resort. But yeah, the scene there is very bustling. So many more projects are building, but still very medium size project scale because not a lot of people know about tier two. Only the domestic residents like myself know about that or that area, but tourists might not be aware of those tier two cities. I think there's still even more room to grow in the hospitality and tourism. sector in Vietnam.
So what do you think that means for, the opportunities, right? I mean, like, if I was like taking a step back, okay, Trump, just a change. Okay. So it sounds like to me, if I was a business person, I would be like, okay, number one is maybe invest in tourism. That's one. Two is work with the Chinese in JVs to bring Chinese capital and expertise as they, relocate their factory and manufacturing supply chain into Vietnam and continue
Mhm.
exporting to the US as number two. And then number three is, I don't know, become a franchise of a Chinese F&B or other consumer brand, right? That's number three. I mean, what are the other opportunities you think will happen because of this? Yeah.
I think also don't forget about real estate. Still the largest, I guess the most valuable asset of any Vietnamese, right? Because as Vietnamese, we cannot invest overseas. So for us mentally will be the most valuable asset ever. It's always gonna go up. I think the real estate crisis was a good correction moment in 2027. There will be like so much more booming in the real estate market. Yeah, I'm also trying to get into the market right now.
No, I got to ask a question actually, which is, I think China also had a real estate crisis, right?
Yeah.
Around a bit earlier than this process, but some similar dynamics because of there's a crackdown. There was also a push on the restructuring of the economy and so on and so forth. I'm just kind of curious because you seem a lot more bullish that Vietnam will
Yeah.
definitely, property prices will always go up.
Yeah.
That's you know, but I think China is still struggling with that real estate crisis. It's still kind of like slow motion, not being fully fixed yet.
Mm.
So I guess I got to ask questions like, what do you see a difference? And also, I think a big difference as well is that in China, the land is all owned by government. Is Vietnamese land owned by the government or is it owned by individuals? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah.
Yeah. There's fundamentally a big difference between the crisis in China and Vietnam. The crisis in China, because the demand is not there, right? There's too many supplies. They overbuild apartments and real estate project in China. On the other hand, Vietnam, we actually have demand problem. We have supply problem. We have too many like young people or young family want to a house, but there's not enough supply, especially with let's say 2-bedroom apartment in the city. As a tourist coming into Ho Chi Minh City, for example, I don't have many choices. Either I go to like hotel, which are 200, 300 US dollar per night, or have to find Airbnb. But then recently, the city recently have announced that they will ban Airbnb in Ho Chi Minh City because they want to that real estate, like the 2-bedroom family who actually want to stay and want to buy a house instead of giving it to some tourists. We have a supply problem. So it's very different. And I think, yeah, real estate has huge room to grow in Vietnam still. And I think timing wise, confidently, I would say 2027. And everything will be like double to triple. This is not investment advice, but it's just my opinion.
Sorry. It's like Jeremy goes out to buy a house in Vietnam now. I'm not allowed to, right? I mean, I think I have to be a Vietnamese national to.
Yeah. For that part, the land, yes, does belong to government. But if you are Vietnamese citizen, you can technically like get that land permission to use indefinitely. If you are foreigner, they limit you to choose between a few option only. So I'm a Vietnamese, I can choose whatever projects I can buy from any project I want. But for foreigner, you can have I think a really few options. Yeah.
Mm.
They want to protect that asset to Vietnamese citizen only. Yeah.
The question I got to ask you is, in Singapore, there is government land and then residents can lease it from the government for 99 years, right? So it's called
Yeah.
99-year
In bill.
land. So is that 99 years also for you all? Or is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
Same thing.
all land, all residential land that is bought by people when they buy a house or property developer is on a 99-year lease from the
Yeah.
government.
Look, it's not just residential land. I think
Yeah.
all land in Vietnam belongs to the
Yeah.
government. We are a
Right.
socialist republic country. Everything
Mm.
we own belongs to the government. So the largest real estate owner in Vietnam is our Communist Party.
Yeah. No, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering because I think
Yeah.
in Singapore, there's like, I think less than 10% of land is kind of like freehold, which is, I think, owned by private people.
Yeah.
And then about 90% of land is leasehold, which is leased from government. So what you're just telling me is that, Vietnam is 100%, which is my understanding for China as well. So I just kind of curious as well. Awesome.
Yes.
On that note, thank you so much, Valerie, for sharing your stories.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.